Hello, and welcome to the Astrology Channel. I am Joji. I am an astrologer, contrary to what some people might believe if you've been reading my skeptical newsletters as of late. But today, I'm here with my friend Kyle. We're doing what we always do. We're talking about the days of the week. Hi, Kyle.
Hi, Joe.
What's happening this week, Kyle?
So this week we have several aspects completing. We have Mars trine Venus finally culminating and maybe starting to wind down, start to turn the heat down a little bit. It's been getting a little too spicy. We have Jupiter in Gemini trine Mercury in Libra. Jupiter is also stationing retrograde on Tuesday, I believe. And we have the Sun in Libra square Mars in Cancer.
With that out of the way, let's get to the days of the week. First, we have October 7th, Moon's Day, like it always is. The moon is waxing in Sagittarius. She's out of her element, and Mercury's decadent in Jupiter's terms, moving from a sextile to Pluto towards a sextile to the Sun and a Saturn square all at the same time. Interesting day for the moon. It's a busy day for sure. The thing that I was thinking about is just the sense of speed, just because the moon is starting the day at the very early degrees of Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is an overall kind of like fast, speedy sign. It's a fire sign, so it will always have this sense of vitality attached to it. The thing that I was leaning on for today is that a lot of this speed is really coming from a sense of urgency, or that you really just have to get to that thing. Otherwise, it's like it's now or never, or things are just going to explode, or whatever it is. And I think the thing that's a little bit challenging about that is that some of these anxieties or some of this sense of speed might not be entirely grounded. Just thinking about Jupiter being in Gemini, it's in the opposite sign, so the moon will oppose Jupiter. So there's the sense that we might feel like things need to be done today. That might not be entirely true, especially with Jupiter, who's ruling the moon right now, getting ready to go retrograde, and the moon also getting ready to square Saturn. So I think that the vibe of the day is that urgency, but be careful not to, in your haste, to make mistakes or to cause even more trouble or more work for yourself than you already have to do.
It's funny, I have our dog has a Sun Jupiter Mercury conjunction in this decan, and I can attest to its focus on speed and the thrill of the chase. He likes to chase squirrels a lot, and then the squirrels will hide up in the tree and taunt him. But that sort of going after the first thing that you see. Speed is kind of the signature for the day, but the day ends with the moon completing that square with Saturn. There are ways where running into a wall hurts a lot more depending on how fast you're going. So I would advise against maybe chasing after maybe the first thing you see too vigorously, or there's a way that Saturn in Pisces can be like almost like a false Jupiter, like, you know, seeing a squirrel or what you think is a squirrel, chasing it, and actually it's, you know, a Wolverine that is gonna, you know, mess you up. So there's some risk for, you know, chasing something that may not give you the results that you need, or going too hard after things and running into obstacles. Slowing down the pace could be useful. It's like a little bit of over-optimism here with chasing a false promise. We're going to give it a good 3.5 on the difficulty scale. There are some things you can do with it. The moon likes being in Sag. Give it a good 2.5 in terms of utility. Yeah, the right obstacle can be cleared with overwhelming force and speed. Definitely the mutable signs are going to be at the greatest risk. Though maybe Cancer people might want to watch out as well, because Mars is receiving instructions from the squirrel chasing moon right now.
All right, moving on to October 8th. This is our Tuesday, Mars's day. Mars is fallen, is in Cancer, in his element, in Mercury's decadent terms, being received through a trine by Venus and soon being squared by the Sun. So Mars is also something that we missed last week, actually, because Mars has been slow for about a week now. Mars retrograde is looming.
Yeah. There's a way that Mars, when it's approaching its retrograde, starting to slow down. It gets increasingly ambivalent about its willingness to engage in conflict, especially in Cancer, where it's already kind of confused about how to go about doing the Mars thing. So this gives me like kind of a passive aggressive. There's still fun to be had maybe with Venus, but there could be that maybe leaning too much into the fun, sexy stuff to avoid dealing with conflict or directly addressing an issue, even though you're getting like all huffy and about it, and it's obvious that you are, but you still refusing to acknowledge it. Not going to be everybody, but I would watch out for that kind of behavior with people in general.
I like that. I was also sensing a bit of a different side of that. Just in the case that Mars and Venus are just like super tight, I feel like there can also be the sense of the couple itself being that brooding, irritable sort of thing. Like we're both upset and grouchy together, so there can be this like, don't mess with us sort of vibe that I try to capture with the image, because we have Mars and Venus in front of their house. Venus is kind of in the shadows and Mars is very forward looking. They're both in the spotlight in a way, and they're both kind of intimidating. They're trying to scare people away from their lair so they can go back to doing whatever unimaginable things Mars and Venus are up to right now.
I can see a little bit of that. This makes me think a little bit about somebody I know had a family member who brought their partner to a family dinner. I think it might have been Thanksgiving, but he brought his partner there on a leash and just like did that. And it weirded everybody out like super hard, but just like they were kind of getting off on how much they were people uncomfortable.
My God.
If that is your thing, maybe not at a family dinner. Maybe there are issues of consent about appropriate places to showcase your kinky proclivities. There are places where your exhibitionism is more acceptable than others.
Yeah, because I think that that's the exciting thing about the Mars Venus trine, is that it really kind of encourages very adventurous kind of behavior.
Yeah.
The challenging thing is knowing when to stop, especially through this trine, because Mars, especially in a cardinal sign, will kind of just like go for it and ask questions later.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing to be a little bit careful about with this one transit. But otherwise, I feel like it's a fun time. We gave it an even score of 3.5, both in difficulty and utility. So I feel like the things that are difficult about this transit are also the things that make it awesome.
Yeah.
So just, be smart about it. Don't go all crazy and drag people into your fantasies or push people away from fantasies that they might want to participate in.
Yeah. Good way of putting it. This is definitely focused on the water signs, I think. Certainly Mars ruled rising signs or Venus ruled rising signs like Aries, Scorpio, Libra, or Taurus.
All right, moving on to our Wednesdays. This is our Mercury day. Mercury is in Libra and their element in Jupiter's decan and Venus's terms, freshly separating from a trine to Jupiter, which was actually a mutual reception, and a moon sextile. And Mercury is also currently still pushing to get away from the rays of the sun. So still not visible, but almost there. If you remember last week's image, last week we had Mercury trying to close a deal, but then Mars was getting in the way with a Mars square, just belting and yelling things to distract Mercury, hopefully to get Mercury to mess what he was talking about or to fail. I feel like that was the biggest thing about last week, is just you have all the things in hand to close that deal or to make that thing that you've been trying to make happen, but then there's a hater in the background just trying to stop you in your tracks. But I think that this week with this Jupiter trine, we actually get to succeed in that, despite all that Mars square stress. To me, that's good news. And so in the image, I have Mercury shaking the hand of the person they closed their deal with, but then we still see that Mars in the background, a little grouchy that Mercury rose victorious. So I think that one of the things to watch out for the day is that while there may be victories and exciting things to look forward to, we might also run the risk of upsetting people in the process. And that may or may not be something to worry about. I don't think it's entirely the case, but Mercury is about to go into Scorpio, which is ruled by Mars. So it might be something worth considering. You might want to temper some of those feelings as you move forward into the future.
Yeah. This kind of makes me think of I'm going to paraphrase, but I think it was Henry Kissinger who said something along the lines of, in a good compromise, both parties are kind of unsatisfied. Something along those lines. Means that to reach an agreement, you have to give away some of your own priorities in order to make the agreement possible, and so does the other person. Mercury in the last decan of Libra is good for finding a place in time for things that don't seem like they should go together. Like having your partner wear a leash around the house is totally fine in the privacy of your own home, or at a particular type of party where everybody is consenting to participate in your games. You can keep those realities separate and they can still be part of the same larger reality. I think today's a good day for reconciling complicated issues or talking through things that are complicated, maybe exploring novel ways of approaching conflict or writing things into an agreement. But there's a way that we can find a place for all the weirdness, just not letting them get all on top of each other. So we'll give it a good 2.5 difficulty. I still don't like that Mars square, but I think there's a lot that can be done with it. The trine between Mercury and Jupiter is pretty strong and useful. So we're going to give it a good 4 on the utility scale. This is mainly pointed at the air sign heavy people, air signs rising, or if you just have a lot of air placements, I think this will be the most relevant for you guys.
All right, moving on, we go to October 10th. This is our Jupiter day. Jupiter in detriment still in his element in the Sun's decan and Mars's terms, recently received by Mercury through a trine, like we just talked about, and in the Moon's contrantitia.
Yeah, well, so Jupiter just stationed and is starting to move backwards now. This is really a point in Jupiter's cycle where sometimes it's deciding to move into a slightly different direction, but often it's kind of going back and making sure that what has been built or established is stable. When Jupiter goes retrograde, it's not like a reversal of the Jupiter stuff. It's just a more reaffirming what needed to be affirmed and be consolidating on gains that were made. There are likely to be a lot of loose ends that still need to be tied up and a lot of maybe things that were initiated that didn't really get off the ground completely. So maybe deciding whether or not to go through with the list of 20 new projects that you might have come up with over the last few months, deciding which one of those is actually viable, bringing a fresh set of eyes to things and figuring out what you actually do have space for and what actually contributes to the long-term stability of your Jupiterian works.
Yeah, no, I feel that. A lot of what you're saying about going back and making sure that some of these things are stable, to me, I was reading it as almost like this retrograde is actually less of a revision and more of like an actually getting that thing done. Just looking at the steps that Jupiter will be retracing, it's a lot of the things that have happened in August when we had that crazy mutable T-square between Saturn, Mars, Venus, the Moon, the Sun, and everybody else in the fucking zodiac. And so I feel like the Jupiter retrograde, retracing some of those steps now without some of that pressure and chaos, and to just be Jupiter and to be able to actually bring cohesion to all of the things that were damaged in the process is something to definitely look forward to with this Jupiter retrograde. The other thing I was leaning on for today specifically was that if you've been paying attention to the images I've been using for Jupiter, a lot of them were more in the abstract realm. There's a lot of things going on, and it was very maximalist compositions. But then now I'm kind of like toning them down a little bit. There's a little bit more cohesion coming into these images, like things that were just boxes and gears now have become machines, and Jupiter has a job to tend to. I feel like this moment today is just Jupiter kind of like taking a break before going back to that job. But even in that break, I think with looking at the Mercury trine and the reception is that Jupiter is allowed to take that break. Like, it's not like taking the break is gonna make it so you fall even more behind or that things just get even more complicated. I feel like this is a warranted delay or a warranted breather for Jupiter, and I feel pretty good about that. And I think that's why we settled at a 2.5 difficulty for today, so it's not an entirely difficult day, and a 3 utility. So the best thing to use this day for is really to take a rest and settle into a new groove of things.
I think this one's going to be especially relevant to air signs because Mercury and Jupiter are in trine through air signs. When you think about mutable signs, they're all ruled by either Jupiter or Mercury. The planets that rule mutable signs are working together is potentially very useful for mutable sign-heady people.
Moving on to Friday, October 11th, Venus in Scorpio, as we all been knowing. She's in detriment in her own element and decan, and in Jupiter's terms, she's freshly separating from a trine through Mars and a moon square, and moving towards a Uranus opposition, a Neptune trine, and a Pluto sextile. This one was interesting, because it really made me realize that the end of the signs are a lot more dramatic now than usual. Pluto is at the end of Capricorn, Neptune is at the end of Pisces, and Uranus is at the end of Taurus. Whenever planets are leaving a sign, there's this big cathartic bomb of things happening left, right, and center. For this one, I was building on the Venus Mars story. Like, we all know what they're up to. I think that we don't even have to repeat it at this point. I feel like on this Friday, especially with Venus separating from Mars, we can get more of the Venus and less of the Mars, which is pretty exciting, especially with Venus in her own decan and in Scorpio. This can be Venus taking control in this whole Mars-Venus trine situation. She is the fastest moving planet after all, so she had her moment with Mars, and now she's moving on to bigger and better things, and as you're gonna see next week, she's gonna be busy. I feel like with the image, it's looking pretty sexy. There's ropes around the place. We all know that they're gonna get to some interesting business there. I feel like this is the point in this Venus-Mars story where things can be a little, I don't want to use the word safer because it's not necessarily the word, but it's more of the love and then the entertainment and the pleasure and less of the let's get crazy out here.
It's interesting because there's a way in which, because Venus does have a lot of strength actually, and the last decan of Scorpio, she on the one hand has the ability to really draw in her deepest desires, for better and for worse, almost without knowing it. The things she didn't even know she wanted, or that were like working under the surface. But that can also be problematic. Sometimes we think we want something or we don't realize we want something, but what we want isn't always what's good for us. There's sort of questions that get raised and how much we can get overly attached to that pattern and get caught in cycles of sometimes addictive cycles or becoming overly attached to things that aren't good for us. And Venus having a lot more of her own power here, it starts to become a little more Venus-led, and maybe there can be a review about, yeah, that was real hot, but it got a little gross and a little dangerous. Maybe we need to do a little less of that, or maybe this relationship was not so good for me, and I need to find the right place for it in my life.
Yeah, because I feel like that really illustrates the Venus-Mars dynamic. It can be one of two things. It can be either Venus is realizing that like this relationship with Mars is like totally the thing that she wants to continue to pursue, or it's like really the Mars is just like a fun little fling and she's ready to move on to the next thing. But then Mars is going to be really hurt about that. So it's like, it's one of those two. But I feel like the big thing is just that the mastery of that desire, like really coming to terms with like, well, it actually worked in this whole thing and what actually hasn't, and moving forward with that. And for those reasons, we settled at a pretty even score. Difficulty and utility are both at a 3.5. There's a lot that can be done about this day. Some of these emotional questions might be difficult to parse through, but I feel like there's also a lot of fun that can come with that. I think the difficulty comes after the fun has happened.
I think this one definitely has, it's on the water signs for sure, but I'd also say the Taurus and Libra risings might also want to pay attention.
All right. Moving on to our Saturday. It's Saturn in Pisces, out of element, peregrine, in Jupiter's decan in terms, nothing has changed, still retrograde, separating from the sun's in Tisha, and still void, of course, because no one's applying to Saturn. Saturn is also not applying to anybody. There's really nothing happening today. That's kind of like the challenge of the day. There's truly nothing happening. It's a lot of the same shit especially Saturn and Pisces. It's like we've been in Pisces for so long. We're so ready to move on. I think at this point we're only a month away from Saturn leaving retrograde and starting to move forward again. The real feeling I was tapping into today was what I have in the image, just Lady Saturn in her boat, still in the middle of the ocean, looking at the sky, and there is nothing but water all around. It's a monochromatic picture, all blue and black. My keyword for the day is utter boredom and just being lost in the emotion of boredom. Really sinking into that.
Yeah, it's funny. I spent an inordinate amount of time thinking about what to talk about for this Saturday in particular, because we've been talking about Saturn in basically the same place for week after week, but there's usually planets interacting with it. Like there's something going on. Right now, Saturn's kind of adrift, alone. Sitting with it for a while, the result was that I just felt this incredible lack of inspiration for what to talk about, but I think that's kind of what Saturn is doing here a little bit, or what the confrontation is with being cut off from the place where inspiration comes from, or encountering the wall that separates you from that place where you're like, yeah, that's it. That's the thing that brings me joy and makes me want to act. So I didn't have a lot to say about today, but I thought we could open it up and ask viewers, especially the ones who are having maybe Saturn returns right now, what their experience of Saturn and Pisces has been so far. I would love to hear some Saturn return stories. How is this going for you if you have Saturn and Pisces?
All right. A somewhat difficult day because there's nothing happening and maybe we wish things were happening. We settled at 3 for today. Utility, not a very useful day either. I think giving it a 1 is kind of generous. I wouldn't say don't do nothing today, but also don't do nothing today. It's okay. And Kyle, who would you say would be most impacted by this one? I guess, or Saturn return people like you were talking about. But is there anyone else?
Yeah, I would say our Saturn return people, mutable signs in general.
Moving on to the last day of our week, October 13th, with the sun in Libra, fallen out of element in Jupiter's decan in terms, soon being received by Jupiter through a trine. While all that's happening, the sun is also moving towards Mars square.
This is tricky. Poor sun in Libra has just been getting smashed by eclipses, by Mars and Cancer, and it is deep in the square with Mars still, but it has that trine giving it a little bit of grace. I think there's a way this can be useful for identifying what's left after everything you thought you were gets called into question, or an opportunity to achieve some clarity maybe on the things that we identify as ourselves, that we strongly identify with. When those things get called into question, or maybe we find out we don't believe in those things anymore, who are we then? I think with the Jupiter revisiting maybe the things that we believe in or things that we hold to be true, there is also an opportunity to find the self that's like hidden underneath that, or the thing about being a self that extends beyond or is deeper than who we are in any moment, or who we're hanging out with, or the things that we like, or the things that we believe in, the groups or political identities that we associate with.
Yeah. And I was finding this date pretty interesting because we're almost at the end of Libra. Next week, we'll still have the sun in Libra, but we're pretty much at the end of it all, getting ready to go into Scorpio. And from here on out, the sun will only get a break once it gets into Sagittarius. After that, it's really like the sun's not having the greatest time in the world. So I was imagining this, like the sun already knows that it's going into this difficult journey. It's already at a pretty difficult spot. With the Jupiter trine and things like that, there's also this optimism to try and retrieve some of that solar leadership or vitality and energy. And so in the image I had, the sun looking for a new crown, but the only crown the sun can find is at the ruins of a torn down kingdom. That's like, yes, you have a crown, but there's no kingdom to lead. There's nothing to do. And so what do you do with this crown? I think that's the biggest thing. Once you're leaving Libra, you're leaving this top spot in your life. Maybe you get, at the end of this journey, you get like a little bit of participation prize. What do you do with that participation prize? Is that something that you can use and exploit, or is that something that maybe will just bring you back to the same issues that you've had in the past? Kind of like really leaning into some of the existentialism of this.
I would say a pretty bad day if you want to be rooted in an idea of who you are. We're going to give it a good 4 on difficulty. I think it's pretty difficult, that Mars square, but Jupiter is also there to teach us something from it. So we're going to give it a good 3 utility wise.
But who would you say should pay attention to today?
I think the cardinal signs are going to be feeling this one for sure, but I would say especially the Leo heavy people.
Nice. Well, that is our week, guys. Let's look at the week at a summary. So, Monday, what would you say is the vibe, Kyle?
Monday is about chasing opportunity, but making sure that opportunity isn't just another dead end or obligation that will weigh you down.
Yeah. I think that ties into Tuesday in an interesting way with that Mars-Venus trine, because then again, a bit of that opportunity might also be in that relational sphere, like we're talking about with Venus. Is like maybe you have the opportunity to fully engage in this relationship, or maybe you have the opportunity to fully engage in this desire or fantasy, but is that something that you want, or is that something that you don't want? Think about that.
So Wednesday is very much about putting everything in its right place, coming to terms with incongruent realities.
Yeah, and that ties in perfectly with the Neptune retrograde back into the Mars bounds in Pisces that happens on this day. We didn't talk about it on this episode because we just released a whole episode about it. So if you're curious about what that means, just click the link somewhere. It's in the description too. But then we go into our Thursday after having this little Mercury moment. That builds really nicely because we're sitting with this Mercury-Jupiter trine in these 2 days. And then on the Jupiter day, we're just able to have take a little bit of a break from all that stuff. Let Mercury do the thing. Mercury is better equipped to do the thing right now.
Friday is about getting in touch with the nature of your desire and not just what you want, but why you want it and whether or not that's good for you.
Yeah, and then on Saturday, you can just sit with that and just stay there.
Yeah.
Don't go anywhere. You're frozen in time.
And then Sunday, it's about figuring out who you are after you strip away all the ideas about who you think you are, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, this is our week. Let's take a look at our difficulty and utility ratings. It looks like if you're in for an existential crisis weekend, we deliver that. For most of the week, the difficulty stays pretty even for the most part. Looks like Mercury and Jupiter days are kind of the better days. Although we can also make a case for Mars Day and Venus Day being pretty decent. So I think if you want to get things done, try from Tuesday to Friday. Monday can be a little rushed, so let's not push that too far. The best day of the week really would be Mercury's day, so that would be the one that I would save for my important doings, whatever those doings are.
We come out to a good 3 average overall. The aggregate is kind of middle of the road, but I would say there's a lot of extremes.
Yeah, totally. All right, guys, this is all for today. Thank you for spending some time with us. I'm Joe G. I'm an astrologer, and you can find me at themercuryrising.com.
And I'm Kyle Pierce, and you can find me at kylepierceastrologer.com.
All right. We will see you next week. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you did watch all the way through, please just leave a like. It does help. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.